Hey, so I wanted to share my current process for when I'm working on an existing project. It's kind of easy when you're going from zero to one. You can kind of do whatever you want. It's a lot harder when you're working with an existing project, albeit in this case, a work in progress. So this is kind of my overall process. And really it starts with kind of understanding what's already there. Now, in this case, I always have already built out extensive documentation for the project before I even started building anything. That really helped me to understand exactly what I wanted to build and how it was going to work and all those kind of things. And did a lot of iteration at that stage to make sure that what I was going to be building was the right thing in the right way. And so immediately, the first thing I did was kind of get my head into that stuff, refresh myself, remind myself, and have another look through. So this is an open source repository. You can have a look if you really want. But basically, the feature which I was building out was a data schema editor. And so that was all covered by the microservice, which is a business store. So I just needed to kind of go back through the documentation and remind myself exactly how it works, kind of have a look at the overview, which tells us what it's doing, how it works, that kind of thing. And very particularly here, also the data schemas, because it's really important when we're building that front end that it's interacting with the existing database. Again, if you're creating a new project, then Lovable can create whatever database schema you want. It doesn't actually matter. If you're working with an existing project and an existing database, you need to make sure it's going to match exactly what you already have. So there's really two aspects to this, a little bit more complicated than normal. But the first was that the actual data model for the table that we're going to be working with, and then also there's a bit of an exception. We were working on a data schema editor, therefore we needed to know and understand the format of what that looked like. And in essence, long story short, we capture an entire Postgres schema in a oh yeah, there we go. We capture an entire database schema in JSON. And we've already written a conversion so that if we have the JSON, then we can actually run it and create a full Postgres database using it. So the idea for this project was to build out the front end, which allowed us to generate and edit those JSON schemas for the data model so that we can actually work with them in the front end. So enough of the waffle. That was the documentation. That was getting my head into it, and I need to get on with things. So the first thing I normally do when I'm thinking about how to implement the front end is go and get a bit of inspiration from Dribbble. And there's lots of lovely stuff on there. Usually you search for stuff and it comes up really nice things. Um, I guess the problem is when you're doing a feature like this for a database schema is that most of the time, 99.9% of the time, the user is going to be technical. So you've got, things like this where you've got data flow diagrams and, very technical looking things on the left-hand side, which again, it's fine and beautiful if you're working with technical users. The whole point of augmented OS is that semi-technical users should find it very easy and intuitive to use. And so really none of the examples which I looked at here were kind of quite cutting it. There were some which were displaying data, which looked quite nice, but there's nothing really for kind of editing data. So I gave up on Dribbble quite immediately, which is unusual for me. Usually there's some nice stuff I could just screenshot it and go build this. But instead, what I did was actually, I missed out a step here. What I actually did here when I went from Dribbble, yeah, that is O3. So what I then did was I asked O3 to go and do some research for me, and I asked it to go and research the patterns. So what different patterns exist for this? Can you give me examples, the screenshots, etc., etc. So it kind of came back to me with, super bases spreadsheet style. Again, it's not quite right. This is editing data rather than the underlying schema, but never mind. There was missing here, apparently, color-coded grid. So again, this is all kind of data display. No code DB. and it actually put all this into an HTML file for me with links, so I could look at it a little bit easier than what we see here. But again, it wasn't really hitting the nail on the head. So what I figured was that the best thing to do was kind of take the existing ideas and the stuff which I'd seen, which I did like, and just start experimenting. Now, again, if you're building a project from scratch, you probably just experiment with Lovable and go, hey, build me this, and kind of see what it looks like. Now, that's a bit more difficult to take that project and put it into something you've already done. So for this kind of thing, I use Claude quite a bit to just, prototype, play around with ideas and designs and stuff like that. Claude is very good with tool use, so that means it's really good at using its built-in canvas to kind of build stuff like this. And it's also very good at design as of the latest versions. So that's pretty cool. So we talked about all these documents, which I have here. And basically what I did is I dumped it all into Claude. You can see a whole load of documentation here. All that hard work came in handy. I said, look, I'm building a data schema editor. It's really important that it's easy to use. It's for non-technical users. Let's start prototyping and kind of iterate and see what we can come up with. Now, actually, the first thing it came up with was a bit rubbish. Other than the fact that it's really crammed in the scheme. It still looks very kind of technical, so I gave it some feedback, kind of change it, and then it started to look quite good. And I was like, okay, now we're starting to get there. I kind of like this layout on the left-hand side. That's really nice and clean and easy and intuitive. I'm not quite sure about the table, so let's have a little play and see what we can do. At this point, I think I found some stuff on Dribbble which was interesting, and I was like, well, actually, this layout's really nice. Somehow just having the icon there to tell you what type of field it is makes it a lot easier visually to look at. So it's like, okay, can we iterate? Can we try experimenting with that and see what it looks like? And actually, I really like that. It's like, okay, this is something we can work with. So, probably a few more iterations later, started to kind of get to the point where it's like, right, okay, I've got the kind of design nailed. It doesn't always get it perfect. Kind of got the design nailed for now. Relatively happy with this, and knew that actually by the time I want to change stuff more, it's probably going to be better to take this design and get it into our code base and then edit it from there within Cursor. Now, that sounds simple, but it's really not, because we've just got a whole bunch of kind of code here with everything in one place. Now, when we're going into an established code base, it's not just that we want to build that out, but we need to build it out in exactly the same standards and structures as the existing code is. So that's where the kind of cursor rules really come in handy, because we can already document what structures we're using and that kind of thing, and exactly how we should be creating things. And we can then use that to create the YAML tasks, which we'll talk about in a bit, which is how we're actually going to implement the feature within Cursor. Yeah, now before I get too far into that, let me just show you the Cursor rules that I used here. So first of all, we've got a create task rule. Yeah, so I set this up to create everything in the YAML format that I wanted. So we have a specific action here which Cursor can take, and it will follow the step-by-step instructions to actually create the task which we want. Yeah, so clearly I was going to use that in order to do it. But also, and I can't see it in this repository. I know it is in here. There we go. Okay. So this is also a guide for exactly how we implement features within our repo. So basically, each significant page would be a different feature, and we want it to follow the same structure, right? So we want to have like components, hooks, types, utilities. We want to make sure that we're using a top level service anytime we pull in data and not directly calling Supabase and the hooks. we've got all these little things which actually add up to being really, really important in terms of code quality, how we build this out, how we build it modular, and make sure that we're actually maintaining exactly the same coding standards that we are elsewhere in the existing project. Yeah. So all of this was automatically used by Cursor because this is a I think an agent request rule, and therefore as soon as I said I was building a feature, create a task for it, it would have pulled this context in and have a look at it. Right. So that's how we then created our YAML tasks, and the YAML tasks they are finished obviously. But if we look in our kind of finished folder here, so we've got you know, the kind of the things that we would want to do in the right order in order to try and force the agent to do exactly what we want in the order we want it to do. So you can see we've told it this is what we're going to be, you know, this is the files that you need to load here. This is the target. This is what you're going to be working on. You need to create a directory here. You need to create this file. You need to create the types file. And you need to run checks when you're done to make sure that you haven't created any type errors or any linting errors or all that kind of thing. And this is a pattern which it follows for basically every task which we want it to do, with a little bit of flexibility built in there. If you haven't seen my augmented engineering repository, we've got all of that templates and schemas and stuff available there. So once we had all that built up, then we could start executing it, right? And I think it created 6 at first, and then I needed to step in and do some refactoring. So what was really cool here is that we could actually see it very, very closely following the YAML schema which we'd given it. So if we look at this as an example, this was the final automated task at the beginning, right? So we had dependencies, which like, okay, you can't do this task until we have the other tasks done. You've got these things in place. So it checked to make sure those tasks were done. Now, what was really cool is halfway through this one, I needed to step in and change something quickly. And when I changed it, I also revised the following tasks to make sure that they used a slightly different way we decided what to do. But because of that, the dependencies changed, and basically I needed to execute 106 before I executed 105. Now what's really cool here then is I tried to execute 105 and it actually refused, because it loaded up the task, it checked the dependencies, and it said, oh, sorry, you haven't done this task yet, therefore I can't actually do it, I'm going to stop now. Yeah, so it shows it's not just following things in the right order, but it's actually obeying our instruction as well, which is why I think this kind of YAML is really useful. I've looked at different ways of doing this with JSON, but YAML is just so readable once you kind of get used to it. So again, this was just a screenshot of how the agent is executing it. You can see we literally only need to say execute and then tag in the task. And because it knows it's executing a task, it knows it needs to fetch the rule, which tells us how exactly to execute a task. Pulled that in, that's telling it to follow step by step, telling it explicitly to pull in the context before it does anything, etc., etc. And we can see this is working really well because everything that the agent is doing here is following the order in our YAML. So you can see we've told it to load this context. It's loaded the context. We can see it's loading some documents, and it's gone and checked the document and the rule which we've told it to, right? The first step is to check make sure you follow the established page component pattern. So it's decided to go and check, oh, what is that pattern? What does it look like? Let's make sure that we're following it. Yeah. So the whole execution process worked really well on this. Had to do a little bit of refactoring afterwards, but for the most part, it was just kind of hit execute and go. And we've now not just integrated it into our code base, but we've done it in exactly the way that we want, with the code structure, code quality, and conventions, and everything else that we want. So once it's then in there, Obviously, we can check the engineering quality as we go along. I guess the only thing I missed out here was that after creating the tasks, I didn't just execute them straight away. What I did was try it with different models. So if I built the task, for instance, with Gemini, can't remember if I used Claude or Gemini, but what I would then do is say, okay, if I use Gemini to generate the task, let's try it with Claude, let's try it with O4 Mini, and say to it, hey, check over this task, check the code base, is this doing what we want it to do? Are we missing anything important here? Is it not aligned with our code base, et cetera, et cetera? And generally, it will pick up a couple of things which are either it can improve on or clarify to improve the chances of getting it right. So again, really, really useful exercise to have those tasks, which is our kind of single source of truth. So here's what we want to do. And then we can actually get feedback from the LLMs before we implement it. Because remember, they're better at reading and writing, especially when it comes to code quality. So yeah, after all this, then we ended up with something a little bit similar to our little mock-up that we had in Claude, but this is now fully integrated with our code base. It's coming from our database. We're able to edit, we're able to change things. I can kind of prove it just in case you don't believe me. If I change this field name to name 2, save it and refresh, you'll see it pulls that in from the database. Ooh, lightning fast, of course, all working very lovely. And so, we've obviously tweaked the design a little bit from what Claude did, but the main thing was kind of getting the design there, and then we can build out the functionality. So, for instance, we've got a really nice kind of edit functionality where we just pull down the line and we can change everything that we want, as you just saw there. We've got relationships where if I pull up a rentals table, we can see it's got a couple of relationships with other tables in here. And I haven't built out the data view yet because that's related to another feature, and we'll just kind of tap into that when the data viewing is done. So yeah, that was my kind of end-to-end process on building this out on an existing project, using code to write realistically every line, but to a very high quality to what I would have written it if I'd written it. And yeah, hope you found it interesting.